This episode is supported in part by Sacred Wright's public scholarship on religion, gender, and sexuality through a grant from the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation. You can find Sacred Wrights online at sacred-rights.org and the Carpenter Foundation at carpenterfoundation.us. Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. Welcome to Season 9 of my conversations featuring cohort members from Sacred Wrights. Since 2020, I have discussed the diverse array of research conducted and produced by Sacred Wrights scholars. Playlists to the previous 8 seasons are included in the link tree in the episode notes. On this episode, my guest is Peach Hoyle. Peach Hoyle is a PhD student at the Faculty of Divinity, University of Cambridge, and the Woolf Institute. They are conducting ethnographic research into the dynamics of resistance and compliance in women's interfaith organizations in the contemporary British public sphere. One of their key interests is how often dismissed convivial activities like crafting and food sharing create conditions for meaningful relationship building in interfaith spaces. On this episode, we discuss exactly that in a piece of writing focusing on the drumline reggae chords titled "It's Time to Take Bagels and Samosas Seriously: Gender and the Quiet Power of Interfaith Food Sharing." Please enjoy my conversation with Peach Hoyle. Peach Hoyle, welcome to Classical Ideas.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm delighted that you're here. Peach, I'm wondering if we can kick this off by having you introduce yourself a little bit to the audience out there so they know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so my name's Peach Hoyle. I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Cambridge in the UK. My PhD research looks at women's interfaith initiatives, which basically means I've been going into spaces where women of different faiths kind of come together to meet, build community and relationships. And I've been talking to them and taking part in those spaces.
Wonderful. I want to know a little bit about the backstory for how you got into that. Like, how did you get interested in religion as an academic discipline in general? Tell me a little bit about the origin, what led you down this path.
Yeah, so my kind of big turning point is a long time ago now when I was 17. I didn't go to school. I was homeschooled very chaotically by parents who'd never been to university. That was not on the cards for me at all. And so I trained to be a dance teacher, and through that, I got invited to be the sort of dance lead on an intercultural project between England and Morocco.
Cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. And we were doing kind of historical dance and music and stuff like that. And I rocked up to this kind of youth center in Essaouira in Morocco to run a class, and speaking to young people from like such different backgrounds to my own just blew my mind. And I was like, oh, I have to do this and I have to learn about it. And like, there's a whole world out there of people who believe completely different things from me. And yeah, so I decided to go to university, and I've kind of been doing that ever since, really.
Excellent. How did you wind up going to Cambridge for your PhD program?
So I was here for undergrad as well. One of my PhD supervisors, Daniel Weiss, was just like a massive influence on me in undergrad. He kind of really prompted me to think a lot about like the interactions between politics and religion, and introduced me to Jewish feminism and just really cool stuff. And so when it came to, I went to Oxford for my master's, and then I kind of, once I was doing my PhD, I was like, I'm going to go back there and talk to Daniel about doing my PhD with him. So I have him and also Professor Ezra Ozurek as my supervisors, and they're amazing.
What drew you in about women's interfaith organizations specifically? How did you narrow down in that research area?
So in my master's, I was looking a bit at the sort of political representation of religious women. And what I found is that sort of faith organizations tend still to be dominated by men, partly because of just the structures of like formal faith leadership. But also secular feminist organizations have not been good with religious women at all. to varying extents, either kind of religion is just not spoken about, or in some kind of more radical feminist spaces, religion is really kind of like pushed out of the space. And that often means religious women are also pushed out of the space. So I became kind of interested in women's interfaith spaces as an alternative both to those kind of mono-faith public sphere representative organizations, but also to secular feminist organizations. And that's kind of what drew me in.
Excellent. I want to talk a little bit about some of your work that you've been doing. Whenever we got in touch, I always love reading the works, sometimes works in progress too, of the guests that come on this podcast. Books, articles, blog entries, you name it, I've talked about it. And the piece that you sent me, I believe it's a work in progress, correct?
Right, yeah.
Excellent. It's called It's Time to Take Bagels and Samosa Seriously: Gender and the Quiet Power of Interfaith Food Sharing. And it focuses on something called I'm not sure if I'm going to say it correctly, the Drumlanrig Accords.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, great. So tell me a little bit about what the Drumlanrig Accords are, and give us a little bit of backstory there.
Yes, so this is something that was announced, I think, in February of this year, and there was kind of big sort of splashy images across some national newspapers of Charles Windsor, the king, surrounded by all of these faith leaders in this castle called Drumlanrig Castle in Scotland, and they were getting together to announce a sort of reconciliation effort being made by the Muslim and Jewish communities of the UK in the context of, over the past couple of years, there has been a sort of degradation in community relationships because of the escalation of violence in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of image, it's very important, and you look at it, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, that's so different from the types of spaces that I'm in.
Mm.
And that really, really struck me that I've been spending all of my time in kind of very grassroots, really women's interfaith spaces. And yet there's this whole separate kind of world out there of mostly men meeting in very fancy spaces, doing something that feels very different. And that's what's prompted me to kind of think and write about these accords.
Excellent. I'm looking at the photo right now, and it looks like it might be about 20 or so people in the photo just eyeballing it, and two are women. Is that correct?
Yes, that's completely correct. I know I'm not the only person who kind of had that gut reaction looking at it. It's partly because what happens when you want to do something important in faith in the UK, of course, the first instinct is to call up the faith leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Most faith communities in the UK are still mostly led by men. And
Mm.
so if you want to have a very important room full of very important people, it's going to end up mostly being men. And I know that this head of progressive Judaism is in there, for example, but it still is very male dominated, and that leads to a very strange situation with gender and power in these kind of big decision making processes.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the photo right now. It looks like can see a third woman who is almost like obscured in the background a little bit, but I see the king right there in the middle. Okay, great. This is a pretty striking image because the opulent surroundings. I mean, it's a very luxurious place that ordinary people in the world could really only ever dream of stepping foot in, except for maybe on like a paid tour whenever they show you like certain types of places. I've been to the UK. I've done some castle tours over there, so I kind of understand the setting and I can kind of put myself in this situation. Okay, so the title of the piece that you sent me is interesting. It's time to take bagels and samosas seriously. And you mentioned some other common phrases, tea and samosa, tea and biscuit, and how those types of terms resonate in interfaith spaces. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about some of these common phrases, your interpretation of why they matter, how those terms are variously interpreted, whatever your reaction is to that question.
Yeah, so very often when you're speaking to sort of interfaith practitioners, especially sort of people who do this more kind of like drumline rig accord kind of big and serious thing. They'll use, they'll say, oh, that was a very bagel and samosa event. Oh, it's a bit tea and samosa, isn't it? And what they mean is nothing important is happening here. Oh, it's a bit convivial. It's a bit grassroots. It's about the vicar meeting with the rabbi and the kind of the local WI are there, Women's Institute in the UK. Very big historical organization here. But what they mean really is that it's unimportant. And that is something I have a lot of questions about because when I go to these women's spaces and when I speak to women in interfaith, they think food is really, really important. Not just as a like, oh, well, it's important, we've got to feed everyone, but emotionally and spiritually, the process for some of my interlocutors of preparing food for others, especially others across difference, is really important. This idea that like food is something we universally need, but that very often the task is like, oh, bring a dish that's like spiritually important to you or says something about your heritage or your religion, and that someone's at home in their kitchen thinking like, I want to make this thing, but I know, Linda's got to keep kosher. It's going to have to be halal. There's a couple of people who are vegan. And then, Jane's got a peanut allergy. And they're integrating all of these needs, not just like spiritual needs, cultural needs, but also like health needs into this food. And it's, I think, in that way, creating almost like a shared domestic space that's very, very intimate. And that intimate relational dynamic, I think, is so overlooked. When we get these big kind of accords, it completely misses that there are people in communities who have relationships with each other, and we can't just like pass over that and make declarations about how communities should or shouldn't be together,
Yeah, and when you take other dietary restrictions of certain communities into consideration and you cook something that fits from your culture, that fits somebody else's dietary restrictions also, it's like that purposeful bridge, right? You didn't just create something that comes from your community. You created something that comes from your community, but also can connect with another community to create that little bridge. And that really fits within the term interfaith in general because it's one faith taking another fully into consideration, bringing something that both communities can eat and enjoy within the confines of the dietary practices that they have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is this, it seems to really matter to people. That seems to be like a genuinely spiritual form of hospitality, I think.
Yeah. How do you find the groups that you like interview and work with and talk to? How do you go about being involved in these groups yourself?
So again, partly because they're often very grassroots, they often get very little funding. It's quite difficult. Quite a lot of networking, quite a lot of sort of sending emails to addresses that bounce and then having to do all sorts of detective work to find out who's currently running this group or if it even exists. Um, Sometimes looking through like parish churches like listings and they're like, oh, the women's group, the women's interfaith group meets on Thursdays. So it's like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
um
Okay. Well,
Hard to
tell
find.
me. Yeah, tell me a little bit more about the something in the article caught my attention as well when you talked about the differences between catering and cooking, right?
Hmm.
For me, like I am an extremely food motivated person in general. It's kind of an ongoing joke within my family that I'm very food inspired. Um, I love everything about it. But when I am personally cooking at home, if I'm alone, I will eat like a total monster, something out of the freezer that I can cook in like 7 minutes, like in the air fryer or something like that. But then if I'm with the kids and with my partner, like I will go all out and I will cook for hours and I will be completely engrossed in the moment. So it's like if I'm cooking by myself, I'm the catering version of me. If I'm cooking for the kids and my partner, we're like the cooking version of me. It's so different, and that seems to ring true in your article as well.
Yeah, I think absolutely. There's what I don't want to say in my work is that just, oh, food is important, whatever. I think actually food is a process in a lot of these spaces, and it is exactly that. It's the doing, it's the thinking, it's the care, that kind of enacted care where you make something and something becomes physical that is a representation not just of yourself, but of the care that you've given to other people, the thought that you've given to someone else. And I think that's the distinction between like, oh, I heated up this frozen pizza versus like, I spent time, I've given something of myself to make something for all of us, you know?
Yeah. If you were talking to religious leaders in the future in your work who wanted to do better, and what would be some major suggestions that you would offer to faith leaders who want to do better with the topics that you study?
I think one of the it's a very difficult one because the whole framework of interfaith and how it gets funded in the UK is very, very integrated into ways of understanding minority communities that I think are quite pathologizing, that sort of assume that you do need both the state and sort of quietly, because of the way religion is here, Christianity, to mediate between minority communities and minority religions, which are sort of assumed to be inherently in tension. And it's certainly true, like in the last year or so, like there have been tensions. But I think not coming to interfaith with the assumption that there is an inherent deep conflict that must be resolved, that probably needs to be resolved through sort of a mediation process by the state, I think could really change things, because I think very often what is needed is not like a deep like reconciliation of theological or political ideas, but just people getting to know each other.
Yeah.
I don't think people are as inherently in conflict with one another as perhaps some of these kind of big accords tend to assume. And I think I've got big questions about, yeah, how that's integrated into minority management strategies that I don't think are necessarily in anyone's best interests.
Yeah, to me, people who grow up in different cultures are a heck of a lot less scary than they would be made out to be if you only do things like consume mass media on like satellite dish TVs and stuff like that. You know what I mean? People are a lot less scary if you just have a good personality and you just ask good questions and you just have a nice smile on your face and you're just a friendly person. People are pretty cool, honestly, is what I've found whenever I go and do things like longer dinners at sick gurdwaras and stuff like that. People are actually pretty nice. So I'm feeling great about this topic. I just love it, as you can probably tell. Let's talk about sacred rights for a little bit.
Mhm.
You are a member of a public scholarship cohort where the goal is to, become a more comfortable and public facing scholar. As somebody who is an early career person yourself, you're still working on your PhD. It's pretty awesome that you are interested in these topics before you even commence with the PhD and, become a professor or whatever your particular goals are. Um, why do you think it matters for you personally to be a public facing scholar in the world?
I think for me, the history of anthropology of religion is one that has been very extractive in the past, where it's sort of, some professor from England goes into some far sort of orientalized community and takes their experiences and observes them and takes them back to sort of report to the world of academia about this. And I think that's something I really, really, really don't want to do. I don't want to take people's lives and their experiences and sort of sequester them into sort of journals behind paywalls. And I think that's a question of accountability, because I think you need to say things in a way that people can talk back to you and kind of hold a mirror up to each other and say, look, I think you're doing this. I think that you think that, and I'm writing about that. And for them to say, I think you think that because you're this, because you've said, you're coming to it from this perspective. Actually, I think you're wrong. Like, you've got to give people, I think good scholarship is a conversation. And that's why I kind of want to get my work out there so people can be like, really?
Yeah. You know what's so funny too is I'm thinking about like other food ways scholars in religious studies like Nora Rubel and Ben Zeller and folks like that. And I'm like, how cool would it be if there was a podcast that was about food and religion? And I'm like thinking like, oh my gosh, all of you need to collaborate now on some cool project that's just about food and religion in general and like just go hyper niche on that. So I'm like Really excited about these kinds of topics. What did you like take away from the training process that you really enjoyed whenever you met with the cohort in January?
So I think for me, one of the big things, like I'm quite a comfortable public speaker. I do a lot of like
Yeah.
public events, but I get scared about writing.
Mm.
So for me, I'm really trying to work on this process. Like I want to do some articles, I want to get things out there, and there's so much practical content on like how to write a pitch, which publications to contact, what to expect from these kind of interactions, and that everything was helpful, but for me, that really, really practical advice was incredibly useful.
Awesome. What are some particular goals? Do you have any like pie in the sky goals that you're shooting for?
Yeah, so I do. There's a kind of lefty Christian magazine that's just come out called Shibboleth that I really want to
Cool.
write something for. That's a kind of a hope that I have. Um, and yeah, maybe to get something out a bit more into mainstream media. I think there's not very much kind of critical awareness of interfaith relations, and I think people are very readily accepting this idea that Jews and Muslims particularly are like inherently in conflict. So it would be nice to get some stuff out there a bit more broadly as well.
Nice. Something that I love about the training as well is that Dr. Buchar talks very clearly about the risks and the rewards and the responsibilities of that. What are some of your reflections with regards to those three R's in general? Do you feel particularly strongly about one or the other?
I think so in both, well, there's a couple of topics in my research that really speak to this kind of the nexus and the balance.
Mhm.
Um, I think it can be very challenging, especially at the moment, to talk about anything that touches on Palestine. And I'm someone that, like, in my personal life has a lot of involvement in that. So, like, thinking about, what does it mean to honor the communities that I'm speaking to, many of whom hold very different views to my own, to honor my own like ethical um feelings, I guess, or
Mhm.
ethical structures. And also to keep myself safe in this context of, some authoritarian intervention. And so thinking about like what is that nexus and how do we negotiate that has been like, I don't know, I very thought-provoking, and kind of the way it's framed, I think was really, really helpful. And similarly with gender, like as a non-binary researcher researching gender topics, it can be quite intimidating to talk about gender publicly. And again, it really, really helped me to sort of reflect about how we keep that balance.
Yeah. Well, and I love that when I opened up your article that you sent me, like Gaza is literally in the first sentence of the paper, which I think is important, It's important to pay attention to the issues of what's going on around in the world and not just shy away from it. So I appreciate that I can give you a little bit of a platform to focusing on that as well here on this podcast. What are some projects you're working on? What are you shooting for in the next like maybe year?
So one of the big things the PhD has to wrap up. Well, I want to get my thesis done. Um, I'm hopefully working on a project between Cambridge Interfaith program and Cambridge Community Kitchen, which is a local vegan like free food project.
Cool.
We want to start a conversation between those two things, which is going to be really exciting. Um, yeah, I think those are the main things really at the moment.
Are you involved in any like widespread vegan activism or anything like that, or like that kind of like dietary choices?
So I'm very involved in Cambridge Community Kitchen, which has been going nearly for 5 years now. So 2 or 3 times a week, we send out sort of several hundred portions of free vegan food to whoever asks for it, which I think is very fun. I love it.
I mean, that's absolutely amazing. I mean, feel free to like promote that a little bit more if you want, if there's anything that people need to know, or if you have any like socials with regards to that you want people to follow or anything like that too. Feel free to just say whatever where people need to find you.
I mean, off the top of my head, I can't remember. I think on Instagram we're like Cam Community or something. If you search Cambridge Community Kitchen, I think one of the really important things that we always want people to know is that we just started it from nowhere and it just works. And like wherever you are in the world, you probably could just start feeding your neighbors somehow.
That is so cool. Okay, well, now I'm going to have to go down a rabbit hole for that in the future as well. I do another podcast about a very notorious vegan punk band. And so I've talked about that topic a lot on my other podcast, a whole bunch. Well, Peach Hoyle, what a delight to get together and chat a little bit about the Drumlanrig Accords and your article that is in the works. It's time to take bagels and samosas seriously, gender, and the quiet power of interfaith food sharing. Where and when do you think that people can read a little bit more about this topic that we've talked about today from you?
So hopefully I am going to pitch it in the next week or so. I do have a Blue Sky now prompted by Sacred Rights. I have made that. So it's peach-hoyle.bluesky.
Sure.
Peach-hoyle, you should find me, I think.
Fabulous. Well, I will put a link to your Blue Sky in the show notes, as well as the link to your cohorts' bios from the Sacred Rights website. Peach, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you about your work.
Thank you so much.